So, hi there. A few technical difficulties, but we are back. We are on the air, and we are ready to get going with the first Austin Thinks podcast. I say we, of course, because I'm joined by my friend Jarrid. Jarrid, how you going?
Hi, Austin. I'm fantastic today, and super honoured to be a part of your first podcast on this channel.
Yeah, I'm pumped. It's definitely something that's been on the cards for a while. I guess just in general, socializing, I've always found that I gravitate to a long-form conversation, and you know, it's just something that I feel like my opinions could be of value online, on the online space. It's not something that I see necessarily represented by any of the current podcasts, so I thought I'd give it a whirl and see how we go. So what we're talking about today is probably something we've mulled over many times in the past, and that is a ranking of the 2010s years in terms of hip-hop music. So the best year of the 2010s all the way down to the worst year. This is definitely, like I said, something that we've talked about at length. But why not get it on record and see what the people agree with, see what they disagree with, and so on and so forth. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So starting off number 10, the weakest year of the 2010s has to go to the titular 2010. A few of the albums that came out this year were My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Sir Lucius Left Foot by Big Boy, Thank Me Later, Pink Friday, Recovery, and Flocker Valley. So a few headlines from this year. I feel like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, really the genesis of the era that is we're talking about today. I feel like he arrived at this album at a point in hip-hop that was getting quite stale. We were kind of caught up in the bling-bling ringtone era, and he kind of gave us a return to rich sampling and maximal kind of production, and that really laid the blueprint for future artists to run with, and I guess he inspired pretty much everything. We probably wouldn't be talking about this today if it wasn't for My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. I feel like what we came to know as a golden era of hip-hop really spawned from this album. Does that kind of ring true for you?
Yeah, I couldn't agree any more with what you just said, Austin. And Kanye really pushed the envelope when it came to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and it really does stand out in comparison to some of the other albums that you just mentioned from 2010. And that came from a sonic level, that came from a lyrical level as well. He's never been the strongest lyrical artist, Kanye, but it's always something impactful that you can take away from his music at the same time.
I mean, Gorgeous, that song alone is about as good a lyrical performance as you'd ever hear. So yeah, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, I mean, that could hold up an entire video of its own. It represents a cultural shift where you got guys like Lil Wayne and B.O.B. and T.I., they're kind of going into this bling bling kind of era, and it's getting tired. And I feel like when Kanye went away I think he went to Hawaii, and he brought everyone with him, and I remember the stories about how he demanded that when people were in the recording sessions, they had to be wearing suits. Just little kind of things that built this just magnum opus, this epic album. I mean, there are few albums that you could talk about like a cinematic epic, but I feel like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is really one of those. Yeah,
it stands out, like I said before. And when you compare it to some of those other albums that were just exiting the bling era, it just shows that hip-hop was taking another step and it was going into a different direction. Sampling was becoming more prominent again, and Kanye's always been a big part of that.
Yeah, exactly right. It's quite interesting that 2010, the start of the decade, it was almost a statement of intent. Like, that was that, this is this. Let me give you something different. Let me lead the way for the future. And he really did. So in that regard, he was right on time with 2010. But moving on, we've got Recovery as quite a polarizing album in Eminem's discography. I don't know exactly how you feel about it. Me personally, it's always been a bit of a sweet spot for me. I think it was the album that really introduced me to the genre of hip-hop. So for that, I've always kind of got to give it its props. I think it does kind of cop a bit of undue hate just because of how drastic a shift it was for Eminem. Obviously, the lyricism wasn't quite as good as it was in the early years, not even as good as Relapse, but sonically, I actually didn't think it was a bad direction for him. I know a lot of people grow tired of the yelling and the kind of aggressive, the non-stop aggressive, which he probably does take too far in certain points. So you remember this song, Seduction? Seduction, Seduce, like... he's almost yelling in that song where it's supposed to be a love song. It's like, nah, man, just go back to the Superman cadence. Like, what are you doing? But on songs like Cold Wind Blows and Cinderella Man and certain songs, he was really in his wheelhouse. So actually, I don't mind that song. That album. I think that album to me is a solid 7 out of 10.
Yeah, I've always had a soft spot for Recovery, as it was one of the first Eminem albums that I really listened to. Relapse was probably my first introduction into Eminem, and that was pretty wacky, and it was different from his other discography. It was a weird move for him still at that point, in my opinion.
What a strange introduction. How'd the Tonya skit sit with you as an 11-year-old?
It's not how it sits with me then, it's how it would sit with everyone else now, if that got brought up. So, I think with Recovery, like songs like Cold Winds Blows, I still listen to that now, and I still get a bit of enjoyment out of it. And Beautiful was a track as well. That's one of my favorites. Oh, sorry, that's from Relapse.
Yeah,
I'm getting mixed up, but
it would fit better on Recovery, in my opinion. Beautiful. I feel like that's a more Recovery kind of song.
Yeah, it definitely is. That's why I probably got mixed up with it. But there's songs on that album so bad. Just Eminem brings that aggression. And there's these rock type beats, and it really does work. It was just different for him at the time.
Yeah, exactly. It was different, but by no means a poor album, at least not in our opinion. And the last little headline, actually 2 more, just a quick one. This is really the phase where Wayne is kicking off Young Money, and he's at a strange point in his career. He's been in the game about 14 years, obviously came up with the Hot Boys. And now he's taking a back seat and he's going into record mogul mode. And there's stories from this era where when Drake was a complete unknown, and he'd just bring Drake out on stage in the middle of his set and just say, here's the new guy, like, pay attention, this is the guy. And I mean, the foresight to bring out Nicki Minaj, Drake and Tyga and introduce them to the world and basically say, like, this is the future of hip-hop. I mean, it's quite amazing in hindsight, isn't it?
Yeah, amazing is the word to put to it. I actually wasn't... I'm not aware if was Lil Wayne the guy that actually introduced these guys? Was he the ones that found them and put them on the map?
With Drake, definitely. I'm not as familiar with the other. I know Tyga was kind of coming. I think Tyga had songs with DJ Mustard and even Kendrick and J-Rock all the way back in the day, I think so. But definitely Drake, and I'm pretty sure with Nicki Minaj, yeah.
Yeah, so that was one of my introductions to hip hop as well. Was when Young Money. The Young Money came out in 2009, and then Bedrock was a song that I used to listen to as a kid. And it's a funny one. Like, being a big Drake fan today, he's come a long way, and Wayne really opened that up.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing about the 2010s is just tracking. I almost feel like Drake is a barometer of the 2010s, the movement of the genre, the shapes and the ebbs and the flows that it takes. I think if you track Drake's sound over time, it really is a representation of what the popular culture is in that any given moment. And just the last one, Waka Flocka. So I touched on, obviously, Flocka Valley. I feel like this might be a bit slept on at times. I feel like this is really a point where trap becomes what we know it is today. It's before this, you've got guys like Jeezy, T.I., Gucci Mane, guys like that. Trap is very much a product of the street and gangster rap and things like that. But with Waka Flocka, he's still taking that element, but with songs like Hard in the Paint, that's playing for an entirely different audience. That's going to the suburban kids. That's going to the frat parties. And now, and people will say about that what they will. But that really set the stage for guys like Travis Scott and guys like Future, not necessarily the sound, but the impact they were able to have. And it took us to a point where now Katy Perry is running to Travis Scott for hits, whereas you look at in 2010, it was Jay-Z and Eminem running to people like Alicia Keys, people like Rihanna for their hits. So it's almost trap music and Waka Flocka really flipped it on its head to where trap music became the popular culture.
Yeah, it's really funny to see what the general consensus of trap music was in 2010, and I myself was quite dismissive of it at the time. I thought it was a bit of a joke, but you listen to albums now like Travis Scott, everyone's looking forward to those albums when they come out, and it's something I wouldn't listen to Waka Flocka today, and to be quite honest, the only song I'm aware of is Hard in the Paint, and it's just, I still find it to be a bit of a meme, that song. So, but like you said, like artists like Travis Scott, that impact from an album like this, who knows where we are today if that wasn't out.
And if anyone's interested in some good viewing, look up, what is it, Head of the State?
Head of the State. That was a good childhood video of ours.
That was back in the Super Hot Fire days. Yeah, no, good times and great content. So anyway, let's move on. Let's move forward to our number 9 pick of the 2010s, and that would be 2019. So some standout albums from this year. We've got Igor, Bandana, Jesus is King, So Much Fun, You Know What I'm Saying, Crash Talk, The Big Day, and Ginger. So for me at least, this year really signifies, sadly, the ending of a renaissance, the ending of a creative revolution in the genre. We'll get to that more later when we touch on those years. But there were still great albums in 2019. Don't mistake me there. But there are also albums coming out where artists are really falling short of the standards we've come to expect from them. And not to bash anyone, but just Crash Talk, The Big Day, Jesus is King. Not necessarily bad. I'm not putting him in the trash pile, but it's just not quite what we'd come to expect from those guys. So let's out of those 3, let's start with The Big Day. I've written here The Big Disappointment. You've always been the Chance fan out of the two of us. So tell me, what was your reaction when you first played The Big Day?
Also known as The Big Letdown. So. Yeah, I was extremely disappointed. I'm a big Chance fan, and it really took the gloss off Chance for me when this album came out. I was in a spot where I was like, geez, I don't know whether I can look forward to his music anymore. And I feel like some of the stuff he has released since then has shown that he's still got the talent to bring out some great music. But to put it quite frank, is that this album was just plain and flavourless, and it had no soul to it. And I know Chance has put it as a really happy, positive album, but Chance's music has always been so rich and vibrant, and this album, like, I cannot remember any instrumental from the album. That's what I put it down to, is that, like, when it comes to hip-hop music as a first, it needs to attract the ear. It needs to be able to make me, bop my head up and down, and this album it just didn't do it for me.
It's not offensively bad. It's not that there's certain albums that are painful to listen to. It's not that. It's just almost painfully unmemorable. It's like, even talking about it now, and to be fair, I've actually never finished The Big Day. I think at my best I've probably got 3/4 of the way through. But it's just not an album that I go to that can really grasp me and get my attention. And I always kind of had my reservations with Chance. I remember you were trying to get me onto him in the acid rap era and the coloring book era. And so it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but The Big Day almost came as affirmation to what I'd been saying the whole time, that, oh, geez, he's not all that. But since then, my opinions on his earlier work has definitely lightened, and I do enjoy those albums. Just, The Big Day, I don't think will ever quite grow on me. Let's move along to Igor and Bandana. For me, at least, these are an absolute twin tower of an otherwise mediocre year. I think both of these albums are 9 to 10 out of 10. I mean, just generational albums. I think both of them bring their respective artists, into an entirely new conversation. Both of them are follow-ups to other albums that brought those artists into different conversations. I'm talking, of course, about Flower Boy and Pinata. So these two albums really proved that these artists were the real deal. They were consistent. What's your pick of those two?
Well, I hate to say it, they're two albums that I'm not 100% familiar with, because I haven't put a lot of listening time into it. Definitely Igor is one album that I haven't put the listens into, and I'm familiar with Earthquake, and I know that these albums are critically lauded. And when it comes to Bandana, I still need to put time into that album. I put a lot of time into Pinata, and I wanted to really love that album, which I do. So Bandana's on my list. So I'm not the person to get the opinion on. I know that you're the person that can give us the best news when it comes to Freddie Gibbs and Madlib.
Yeah, Freddie Gibbs and Madlib, if you don't know, were just the absolute cream of the crop for me this decade. I mean, Madlib's probably ascended to my favourite producer of all time, and Freddie Gibbs, while not necessarily the greatest rapper, is just the most complimentary to Madlib's style. I feel like MF Doom was a more obvious choice to pair with him, because he's kind of got that zany, kind of weird, off-kilter feel about him. But Freddie Gibbs, when he in 2014 at least, he was a straight down the line kind of gangster rapper. And so when they announced that collab, it didn't quite make sense. Why is Madlib going to this guy? Like, Madlib was kind of on the artsy thing and more kind of, so it was a very strange marriage. But by the time you get to Bandana, it's just incredible. It's a bit of a peanut butter and jelly kind of situation where you've got two very different forces just lifting each other up and bringing the best out of each other. And in my opinion, Freddie's best work is entirely with Madlib. Would you agree there?
Yeah, when it comes to Freddie Gibbs, definitely. At the same time, Freddie Gibbs, my favourite song by Freddie Gibbs is Breaking Bad. And like that's no slight. Does Madlib produce that song?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
but
and that's
Freddie picks some good beats, doesn't he?
That's no slight to Madlib at all. But it just works so well. I don't know what else I can really say about it. Is that it's like you said, peanut butter and jelly is the best way to put it. We're just got to be glad that these two found each other.
Well, here's something I know you probably do have something to say about. What did you feel about Ginger, Brockhampton Ginger? What did you feel like that did for their momentum at the time and how it sits in their discography in hindsight?
It definitely pushed Brockhampton forward, and I think every album they have done has pushed them forward. It's just taken different routes. And Ginger was an album that was a lot more mellow compared to the works that they had done in previous years. And it probably had a... when it came to the tone of the album, it was a little bit more poppy in a way, but not necessarily in a route that's radio music, but just maybe easier to the ear and easier to the common listener. But I do love this album. This album has really aged on me. There's only a couple songs I don't go back to on Ginger, and it's in my opinion, it's equal to a lot of their works. I still think the Saturation era stands out itself.
Yeah,
but
clear standout.
But like, what's your opinion on the album? Because I know you're someone that takes different opinions on their post-Saturation work.
Yeah. So I think you and me, we both had very high regard for Brockhampton through the Saturation era. I think that was a really fun time for hip hop, and Ginger was around the time I really hopped off the train, and I haven't really checked for them as much since. Not to say it's a bad album, but there was something about the Saturation albums that was just so colourful and so not pretentious and so almost do-it-yourself and so positive, and you just felt when you were listening to that music like you were with the boys and you were hanging out, and I remember for our friendship group, it was really the soundtrack to that year because it just resonated on that level where it just felt like you were one of Brockhampton. There were so many of them and they were all bringing such different things to the table, and I just feel like Ginger, it's funny how the colour grading of the album covers really demonstrate my feelings about it, but Ginger really kind of felt grey to me. It felt desolate of that colourful kind of vibrant feeling that the Saturation albums had, but musically they were still there and there's still good songs in that album. For me at least, it was Dearly Departed and No Halo that I go back to, but apart from that there's just not a lot that grabbed me about that album.
I think to put it in a word is that I think the album's a lot more moody compared to their other works, and there's a much more personal level with what they're trying to deliver. Obviously, a track like Dearly Departed is quite straight to the point in what they're trying to say. But then you've got tracks on the end of the album like Love Me for Life, which is really taking a different route, and it's just softer. And I think I agree with exactly what you're saying when it comes to the Saturation music. That was like our music at the time. But I don't know if it's necessarily Brockhampton at that time. They moved on. They wanted to do something different.
And that's what I want to get to is, despite my feelings about Ginger, there's no respect lost because at the end of the day, Ginger was where they were at that time. You know, you lose one of your core members and you go through what you go through, and that music was an honest reflection of their emotions at the time. So I wouldn't have had it any other way. You know, at the end of the day, I want happy music from Brockhampton, but if Brockhampton's not there, then I'd rather them just be transparent, and that's exactly what they did. So let's move along. My number 8 pick, and I think this might be the first controversial one for those listening at home, I've gone with 2013. So 2013, standout albums, Yeezus, Long Live ASAP, Doris, Acid Rap, Marshall Mathers LP2, Born Sinner, Nothing Was the Same, My Name Is My Name, Trap Lord, Because the Internet, Old, Watching Movies with the Sound Off. Now, this is tough because going off that list, it's hard to see why it's only come at 8th. In terms of sheer volume, this year could easily be top 5. But for me, this was the year of the 7s. There was a lot of good albums. There wasn't a lot of magnum opuses. What kind of stands out to you in terms of that lineup?
Yeah, I think the album that stood out to me the most was Acid Rap, and my initial reaction to that album was, what the hell is this music, and why is it so wacky and zany and crazy? And the more I listened to it, the more I loved it. And there's just so much soul to that album when it comes to the music and to what Chance is delivering as an artist. And that's why he's stood with me for so long. It's an album that I go back to so frequently and love. But with you saying it was the year of the sevens, I couldn't agree more. The way I ranked my list was, I went through all the albums that I was quite familiar with, and to put it together, this whole year as an average was a 7 for me. Because I don't think many of these albums stick out as some of the artists' best work, and I think that's why it's probably this low on the list.
That's exactly how I feel about it too. And it's strange because if you look at 10 to 20 in terms of like the 10th best album of a given year and the 20th best, I think this year is just as bad as good as anything, because like I said, it's got that volume, it's got depth, but it just doesn't have the premier albums that would really hold it up. Now, one little talking point from this year, TDE strangely absent from this year. So aside from Kendrick's Control verse, which we'll get to, Kendrick, Q, and Absol all released in 2012, all released incredible albums. And this year they don't make any kind of appearance at all. And that's understandable. But the one that isn't understandable is J-Rock. Now, J-Rock had Follow Me Home in 2011. And I feel like 2013 was really the year that he needed to capitalize on the movement of the TDE machine and really come back to the forefront. Because as you know, he was kind of the first out the gate with TDE. But he really took a backseat for many of these years. And I feel like 2013 was his chance that was kind of missed.
Did it hurt TDE though? Because I felt like when To Pimp a Butterfly dropped in 2015, you had J-Rock come out with 90059 after that, and we know how strong TDE were after that point. And we'll get back to that when we get to 2015. So that's an interesting point. I didn't think of that. But I think TDE definitely were absent from this year. But I think when we speak about the impact, you're right. There's probably depth with this year in terms of albums on the back end, but the fact that probably Chance was the only artist from this year in terms of a big name to release his best work as an artist I think it speaks volume for 2013.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think the fact that TDE didn't release an album is almost a mark of their confidence at the time. Like, imagine just breaking into the industry and saying, you know what, we're not going to give it to you straight away. We're going to take our time. We're going to find our sound. And from that, you get albums like Oxymoron. You get albums like Sylvia Demo. You get albums like To Pimp a Butterfly, 90059. So I think it really is a comment on just their kind of longevity and their ability to kind of zoom out and see the big picture. And that's why we're talking about them, because as I'm sure people will find out in the coming episodes, TDE holds a very special place in the hearts of Jarrid and I. So as I just touched on, Kendrick's Control verse, obviously not an album, which is mainly what we're talking about, but I couldn't not mention it. I mean, in hindsight, what is your opinion on that Control verse?
Oh, well, it almost gave TDE the buzz they needed that year. It was massive, and I personally wasn't aware of that verse until maybe a year after this, when I was sort of getting my head around hip-hop as a whole, and listening to more and more music in this genre, but that song was on repeat so many times when I became familiar with it, and it was a funny one because it was a Big Sean song, but Kendrick took all the honors. Yeah,
exactly right. And it's funny how without any albums, TDE has just as much impact as anyone with a single verse, a real statement of intent. It's funny when you track the importance, the influence of that verse, but I feel like he really, as you said, raised the bar high and indirectly inspired so many artists to reach higher into their artistry and come back with answers to Good Kid, Mad City. Like, I've taken rap to this level. Let's see who can follow me there. And I feel like so I feel like Good Kid, Mad City is almost the inspiration, and the Control verse is almost the threat, like, okay, what are you going to do about it, kind of thing. And then we get albums like Summertime '06, we get albums like Forest Hill Drives, we get albums like At Long Last ASAP, and just these just beautifully artistic and conceptual kind of just well thought out albums. So I feel like Kendrick's can you imagine the decade without Kendrick's Control verse? Like, how differently it would look?
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, it provided inspiration and creativity for so many artists afterwards. And it's funny seeing a Kendrick in 2013 that was so brash, because he was really stamping his authority on the game, like you said. But, you know, we haven't really heard from Kendrick for about 2 years now. We obviously know that he went on a big run of features after Damn, but it's been a while now, and it just shows that he's got so much confidence in himself these days. He doesn't need to come out and have a feature every second month. He can just come out when he wants, and everyone's listening.
It's kind of the mold of the modern great artist, isn't it? Just take your time, release when you want to. We'll be here for you. It's a common misconception, the internet age, microwave music, you've got to release every second week to compete. You really don't. If you're great enough, if you're Frank Ocean or if you're Kendrick Lamar, you release whenever the hell you want to. Frank Ocean could take another 4 years and we're still going to be here for it. Kendrick's the exact same way. Obviously not everyone is in that bracket, but if you aspire to be in that bracket, people will wait as long as you need. Sorry, last talking point on 2013. Just an interesting little fun fact. It is the 1 year in hip-hop history where the 4 most popular rappers in history, Kanye, Drake, Eminem, and Jay, all released albums. So, which to you out of those 4 was the standout?
I think Yeezus probably stands out to me the most. It was obviously Kanye's most experimental album at that point. It was sonically so different. A lot of people said he took inspiration from the Death Grips with that album, with what he was trying to do. But I think it was some of the most beautiful sampling work he had done at the time when it comes to songs like... what's the one on the top of my head I'm trying to think of?
On Sight, New Slaves.
New Slaves.
Yeah.
New Slaves is the song that I love listening to still to this day.
Yeah.
Bound 2 is fantastic as well. I wonder if that album just keeps aging better and better as the years go on.
And even now, it still sounds futuristic. It's still, you listen to it, it's like, oh, this is still to come. Like, this sound is going to be popular later, which is incredible to say about an album that's going on 8 years old. Yeezus really grew on me. Wow. Like, when I first listened to it, I didn't understand it. But yeah, it's 40 minutes long. It's 10 songs long, exactly like Illmatic. I always wondered if that was on purpose. But yeah, that's it's just an iconic album. It was honestly the perfect way to follow up My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, because the way to follow up that album, you don't give them the same thing, the sequel. You just say, okay, and you're there now. I'm going to go somewhere completely different. Follow me here. And he really challenged his audience to follow him there. And I think some of us took some time to come along to where he was, but it was worth it. And great art, in my opinion, should always challenge the listener to come along to where the artist is, as opposed to the other way around. Yeah, let's keep moving along. So, in number 7, I've got 2012. So, 2012 had Good Kid, Mad City, 1999 by Joey Badass, The Money Store, Habits and Contradictions, Control System, God Forgives, I Don't, which is probably one of my favorite album titles ever, by Rick Ross, of course, and Dreams and Nightmares. So, me personally, I wanted so badly to put this album higher than I did, just off the strength of Good Kid, Mad City, which on vinyl is sitting above our heads. It's one of my favorite, probably my favorite album ever made. I could definitely do a 5-hour review on Good Kid, Mad City. But aside from that, I think it has a similar thing to some of the later years, where it's just got the incredible top-end talent with Good Kid, Mad City, Money Store, 1999, those other TDE albums I mentioned. But it doesn't quite have the depth. How did you see 2012?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when I was doing my research into this year. There was just a lack of depth on the back end. And Good Kid, Mad City is the one album I only go back to from this era. I know you're a massive 1999 fan. It's just something that hasn't clicked with me yet as a hip-hop listener. But Good Kid, Mad City arguably being the best album of this decade. It's funny that it is in a year that is so shallow.
Yeah, exactly right. But that's not to put aside Control System or Habits and Contradictions, which, I mean, Control System was, I think, to this day, Absol's best output. Some really, really iconic moments on that. And it just, 2012 to me, when I go back and listen to some of these albums, it just has this youthful exuberance, these new artists, this new face of hip-hop coming along and really stamping their way on the image of hip-hop. What does it mean to be a hip-hop star in 2012? It's completely different to what a hip-hop star is in 2009. For instance, hip-hop gets a lot weirder. It gets more spiritual. As we said with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, it reverts back to soul sampling, which I think was super important for some of these albums. So yeah, this was one of the hard ones to rank, because in terms of the best the year has to offer and what it doesn't offer, it's probably the widest margin. But let's keep moving, because like I said, there probably isn't the depth in that year to really sink our teeth into. I want to move along to number 6, which is 2011. So 2011, we have Take Care, Section 80, Live Love ASAP, XXX, Watch the Throne, Cold World, A Sideline Story, Undone, The Carter 4, and Follow Me Home. So which ones out of that one stand out to you?
Well, the two, actually I'll say three that stand out to me is Section 80, Watch the Throne, and Take Care. They're probably the three albums I revisit the most today. Watch the Throne is one that I've been sinking my teeth into more and more as of recent, and I actually think that album's really, really good, and it received a lot of criticism at the time, but the production work on it and just the plain aggression from Jay and Kanye on the album is just a massive highlight to me.
Yeah, that was an album that took me some time to come around to. Whenever I listen to it, I always kind of think, why don't I listen to this more often? But I just kind of never do. It's a very strange album, and I can see both sides of the fence. I can see why I love it, why I would love it, and I could see why I would hate it. You know, it's just, yeah, it's interesting. Like, there's those moments with the dubsteppy kind of production that really hasn't aged well, but then of course the highlights, the big hits on the album are just completely iconic.
It's funny because I think the bonus track, The Joy, is probably the best song on the album as a whole, which wasn't on the initial listing, which is hilarious. But yeah, I agree with you when you say that they tried to do stuff with their sound at the time that was popular with the dubstep, and that stuff doesn't age well. But when it comes to the sampling that Kanye was doing at the time, that was a real highlight.
Yeah, he was on fire. I mean, Otis is just ridiculous. I mean, that in terms of great instrumentals, that's right up there. You also mentioned Section 80. Section 80 is very interesting to me because I almost feel like, and people might say this is blasphemy, I almost feel like it's underrated even now, because when you release albums like Good Kid, Mad City and To Pimp a Butterfly, whatever came before it kind of gets dwarfed, and people aren't really going back. They almost feel like, the same way we talk about Martin Scorsese with Goodfellas. I went and watched, the other day, I watched The Color of Money, which is just, it's a more underrated cut, and I was saying, this is every bit as good as Goodfellas, but people wouldn't know about it, because when you've got work that is that iconic and that embedded into the cultural, the conversations about the culture, people almost don't look any further. And so, but I always thought, as a thought experiment, if Section 80 was his last album and he retired on that, I don't know how you feel it would stand, but to me that would be a genuine hip-hop classic, an incredible kind of, yeah, just an anomaly in the canon of hip-hop music. Yeah,
it definitely is an incredible piece of work, and what stands out to me when it comes to Section 80 is how raw the album is. And Kendrick, his voice sounds different on the album. He obviously went a different direction after this, but songs like High Power, I don't know if he would necessarily make that today. It's very controversial, but that's who Kendrick was at the time. He was making music that was, what he thought. And I'm not saying he doesn't do that today, but there was no bars held against him. He wasn't the name that he was today, so he could just say whatever he wanted.
Yeah, that's definitely a pretty out there song, and not the only out there moment on the album. Keisha's song comes to mind. Another one, interesting one he probably wouldn't make today is Tammy's song. I don't know if you're as familiar with that one, but the story, I mean, I can't really quote the lyrics on that song, but the story that he weaves and how simply he does it, it's almost like a 6-verse, and every verse is just 4 lines, and every verse kind of has the same reprise, but it kind of takes its own different spins and weaves and turns throughout the album, throughout the song, and then it ends on that plot twist. And that song, in a nutshell, is really what Kendrick was bringing to the rap game. He was making it more conceptual, making it more narrative based. He was taking it to a place that you could really, really dive into as a work of like narrative, not just music. So that song is an interesting point in his career, almost as a foreshadowing of what he would really delve into later. And as we also mentioned, Take Care, which I kind of wrote down in a headline of this year. It's really when the 2010s headlining acts made their debuts. And I know Take Care isn't Drake's debut, but it almost serves the same purpose as Section 80 and a few of these other ones, Cold World and Follow Me Home and Live Love ASAP, where it might not be his first project, but it's really where he finds his sound that he would run with, and it's really where he came to be the artist that we think of today when we think Drake.
Yeah, I think this album just speaks who Drake is as an artist. There was so many different places he went with this album, but at the same time, what you mentioned earlier in one of the years was Drake really adapted the sound of the time, and I think he did that with this album. And it does sound a lot different to what he does today, but it works. Like songs like Over My Dead Body, like I think that really works for Drake and his voice at the time. And then you go to, he has his poppy songs like Take Care. That's another really good song in my opinion.
It is.
He just went into different places, and then you have like cameras. To me, what I love about this album was he just did different things. It had a very similar tone at times, but at the same time, he still made it sound sonically different in parts as well.
Yeah, I feel like with a lot of Drake albums, the track list might be a bit bloated, on the bloated side. I feel like he could have shaved it back by 3 or 4 maybe, but at its best, it's peak Drake. It's got the R&B and the rap fusion, and Headlines alone is one of the most incredibly revolutionary rap songs, because it's not rapping then singing, then rapping then singing. It's not a formula. I'm doing both at the same time, and in the middle of my verse, I'm weaving between those two techniques completely seamlessly, and that's almost become the standard. You look at what SoundCloud rap is today and modern trap. It's really, that's what it is. It's neither singing nor rapping. It's a fusion of the two.
People forget that Kendrick is on that album as well.
I've always said, and I think we might do this as a future video, if you were to take the feature list of every album, what album would have the best supergroup? And I feel like Take Care, as its features, would make the most incredible supergroup. I mean, you get Kendrick, you get Andre 3000, you get The Weeknd, you get Rihanna, you get Rick Ross, you get, who else do you get? Nicki Minaj. I mean, wow. Yeah, Lil Wayne, of course. The feature list on that album is absolutely stacked. And for the most part, really well used, especially Kendrick, because it's always, you would have thought it's interesting to see how Kendrick would fit into a Drake album, and he does it perfect. It's completely honest. He recounts his experience meeting Drake, and he ties that into his introduction to the industry and kind of how daunting it seems to him at the time. So yeah, it's a really, really awesome album, and some great highlights from top to bottom with that one. Let's move along. This is another controversial pick, I think people will find. This is the fifth year, and that is 2018. So 2018, we get Astro World, Scorpion, KOD, Daytona, Ye, Kid See Ghost, DiCaprio 2, Room 25, Redemption, Care For Me, Swimming, Culture 2, Iridescence, The Carter 5, Whack World by Tierra Whack, an incredibly underrated album. Victory Lap, which really took on an extra life after Nipsey's untimely passing. We had Taboo, some rap songs, Die Lit, Fetty, and I Am Greater Than I Was, 21 Savage. So I feel like a lot of people would have had this year higher than me. When I see it online in forums, I feel like a lot of people have this top 3, top 2. For me at least, I actually am not as enchanted by Kanye's series of albums as other people are. So I think this might be a point of discrepancy between you and me. I mean, what were the standouts in this year for you?
Well, when it comes to the Kanye albums, Kid See Ghost is an album that I do love and I go back to quite a lot. And I think the formula Kanye went with these albums, they were 7-track albums, I think all of them were. And I think that really worked for me. I like seeing the bookends of both sides of an album and knowing that I'm going to get through. I can see the finish line. And it's not saying that's as in a bad thing that I don't like long albums, but at the same time, I just like to see what I'm getting into when I click on an album.
Did you really think Kid See Ghost was worthy of Fantano's 10?
No, because it's not a 10 for me. There's probably like one. I think Cuddy Montage is the one track that it's not the song I go back to the most on the album, but I can see the impact that the album does have on some people, so I can see why it could be a perfect album.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the album when it first came out, but it was just, as time went along, it just, something about the 7-song formula, it just felt thin to me, which is the completely opposite of the actual material, with incredibly experimental and forward-thinking ideas. But I don't know, and I have the same feelings about Ye and Daytona in a lot of ways. I mean, Daytona has grown on me a lot recently, but even that, it's very kind of, I think Daytona could be compared to Bandana in its formula, where you've got a coke rap kind of gangster rapper hooking up with a artistically inclined producer and kind of making an interesting fusion. And just in my opinion, Bandana and Pinata executed that idea a lot better. Did you write anything down about Daytona?
Yeah, well, Daytona is an album that I probably listened to before I listened to Pinata, and obviously haven't done much listening to Bandana, so I probably got a little bit more impact from that album. I really enjoyed Pusha T's delivery over Kanye's production at the time, and they're quite memorable songs. I really enjoy the feature that he has with Kanye on the album, What Would Make Do Too.
Yeah, it's all good. There's nothing bad about any of those albums. It just, for me, it doesn't scratch a certain itch. So that must just be a completely subjective thing. So take my opinion on that with a grain of salt. It's just something that hasn't personally clicked for me. For what did click for me this year, and there are a fair bit of it. Stop me if there's an album here that you also kind of have opinions on, but Dial-It, Playboy Carti's second album. I don't count Self-Titled as a mixtape. I think that's an album as well. Dial-It, just absolutely incredible in terms of like plunging into the psychedelic landscape of trap music and the Pierre production, and just the way he's working with reverb and ad-libs, on that album. It's some of the most forward-thinking rap music, I think, of that era. Did you ever get into Dial-It?
No, I didn't get into Dial-It, and I've listened to drips and drabs of Playboy Carti, but he's so eccentric at times that it's just not my go necessarily. So, you're not going to get much of an input from me when it comes to Playboy Carti.
He's definitely not for everyone.
No.
One that might be, I think I recommended this album to you a little while back, was Fetty, the Freddie Gibbs and Alchemist collaboration with Currency, of course. I think that is, again, going back to these Kanye albums, that's another example of that concept being executed better, in my opinion, where you've got Currency I wouldn't say is a coke rapper. He's more of like a luxury kind of rapper, but Freddie is over this spacey Alchemist production where he's really giving them space to kind of work in the beats are kind of skeletal, but they've got soul and texture. I think that was the one thing that really strikes me about that album is texture. When you're really going into a world with that album, and it's so cohesive from front to back. And I think Currency and Freddie play off each other magnificently. What were your impressions when you got onto that one?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but I think that sort of production that the Alchemist brings, it really brings out something different when it comes to artists like Freddie Gibbs, because it's a different combination. When you have these two different artists gel together, it's going to always be interesting, whether it be positive or negative. And I think that's what stands out. I've only listened to the album once or twice, so I'm not extremely familiar with it, but that's what I remember taking from that when I did listen to it. I think that one of the most contentious albums from this year was obviously Testing, and we've both got very different opinions on this album.
I actually didn't write that down. That's my mistake. It was definitely worth mentioning. Testing. So what were your impressions initially, and how has it grown on you since?
I've always liked Testing from the first listen to that album, and I've liked the way that A$AP Rocky experimented on that album. He sounds fantastic on the album. As an artist, but I think the biggest problem people have is that sonically he just does some weird things on the album, and he also brings that alternative edge to it, and it's probably more alternative than some of his other albums. What do you remember being your problem with it?
It was just messy. I think that's, the title obviously is a reference to Testing, but I just feel like at long last A$AP from 2015, it did the experimental thing, it did the weird things, and it did it well. It managed to be cohesive. It went in so many directions, but it all came together. And that album almost feels like a classy psychedelic funeral, I think is the best way to describe At Long Last A$AP. The fact that Testing is called just that, Testing, it just feels like, what is the idea that's really bringing all this together? Like, obviously, individual moments are good. Like Tony Tone, I like that one. I liked the original A$AP, what was it, A$AP Forever? Yeah. The Moby sample, obviously.
I can agree with you on that. When they brought in the remix, it was just not needed.
Why'd they do that? That was another turn off for the album. When I heard that, I was like, come on, it didn't need T.I., it didn't need Kid Cudi. He killed it all by himself.
The way I've always imagined that album was, so obviously the album is Testing as a whole, but the way I've envisioned it in my head is like, you've got an old analog TV on, and after each song, you're sort of just switching off to the next thing. It's like you're switching to the next channel.
That's an interesting way to put it, actually.
And that's the way that I've always envisioned the album in my head. And like, yeah, it's not. I don't know if it's my favorite A$AP Rocky album. I really do like it, and I still find it hard to compare to the 2015 album. But in my opinion, I think it is a sleeper.
Yeah, no, it's just entirely fair. Just a few more that I think are underrated that don't get enough attention. Room 25 by No Name. That is, for any do-it-yourself kind of bedroom rappers, I think No Name is one of the most inspirational artists on the scene at the moment, because it's not high production value. It's simple. It's not doing too much. It just relies on its poetry, its beautiful, beautiful production, and that album that's one of those albums when I listen to, I really think, oh my God, like, you can do that. You can make a great rap album, and it just sounds like that. And I think in a similar vein, Whack World by Tierra Whack was another. It's probably a higher production value. Definitely the video that went along with it was really well put together and a lot invested into it. But another album where it was just like, I can't believe you can make rap like this. Like, I've never heard anything quite like it. So it's definitely a deep year. I'll give it that. The year has depth. I think I can't read quite how many albums that I've got listed, but it's a fair bit. It's a lot more than the years that came before it. So, yeah, definitely no shade on 2018. I think it's a really solid year. So let's move along. So our number 4 pick is 2014. So this, to me, like 2012, the top end is absolutely stacked. Out the gate, we have 2014 Forest Hill Drives, Oxymoron, Pinata, Sylvia Demo. We also have My Crazy Life. We have Pink Print, Under Pressure, The Waters by Mick Jenkins, Faces, You're Dead, and Hell Can Wait. What stands out of those albums?
Well, I think Pinata stands out the most, in my opinion. And 2014 Forest Hill Drives, as a listener at the time, that was an album that I would listen to so much. And I think the gloss has been taken a little bit off for 2014 Forest Hill Drive, for me at least. It's just an album that I think I've listened to it so much that I just don't return to as much now.
Yep.
But Pinata, to me, is just it's fresh, and it's there's just so much buoyancy to the album. It just absolutely slaps non-stop.
Well, that's Madlib, isn't it? Yeah. That's the difference between the two albums, is one has Madlib, and Madlib makes beats that just stay interesting. No matter how many times you listen to Pinata, there's certain nuances, certain motifs woven throughout those instrumentals that it's just like you're picking up something new, like a good movie. There's something new in the frame you pick up every time. What was that? You said to me the other day something about Scarface had Breaking Bad, or vice versa.
Scarface samples Breaking Bad on the outro of the song, and it's really subtle, and it's in a different key as well. So, just like things like that. It's just there's subtle touches to the album, and I don't know. It's very memorable to me. I get nostalgia because I think you're the one that introduced me to it, and really encouraged me to get onto it. And there's just points in the album, and I'm just like, wow.
I knew you'd love it, and I think I'd do the same for anyone, because that album, if you're a fan of rap music, you have to like Pinata. I do want to give my thoughts quickly on 2014 Forest Hill Drives, because this is really interesting to me, is that that, to me, is J. Cole's magnum opus. Would you at least agree that it's his best album?
Yeah, I think it is his best album.
So he goes that in December, and then in, I believe, let me think about it, February, we get If You're Reading This, It's Too Late. And then March, we get To Pimp a Butterfly. So you get the three-headed monster of the 2010s, all dropping what could be their greatest album in the space of 4 months, which was, I mean, if you're a hip-hop fan at the time, was just an absolutely... I mean, you think about that now, what's 4 months ago? You know, February, March, like, think about those 3 albums coming out in the last 4 months. It's quite hard to imagine where we're at now.
Yeah, and there were albums that were all renowned at the time. It wasn't like these albums, became better with age. I think from the get-go, people knew that, this was fantastic work from each of the artists.
Yeah, definitely. 2014 also holds a bit of a spot in my heart, because that was the year that I really got turned on to the genre. I think up until that point, it had just been Eminem, Dr. Dre, very kind of entry-level music. And I remember I was going to an Eminem concert in early 2014, and the opening acts were J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar, which, I mean...
That's ridiculous.
Talk about a lineup that had never happened again. That's just, insane. And these guys I really hadn't heard of at the time. I mean, it's hard to believe now, but I hadn't heard of at the time. And so I thought, well, I may as well get my money's worth. And I remember I just went and downloaded Good Kid, Mad City and a few songs off Born Sinner. And wow, that was like, it was a bit of a Alice in Wonderland kind of rabbit hole moment where I just kind of went down and just discovered. And it was challenging, and I didn't like a lot of it at first, but you know, as I said, all good art should challenge you, and it did. And as it grew on me, it just became so deeply embedded to, I guess, the identity of the person that I became. So yeah, for that reason, I say that to say, nostalgic period for me. Let's keep it moving. So number 3, we have 2016. 2016, our third best year. Let's go with the album list. So The Life of Pablo, Coloring Book, Lil Uzi Vert vs. The World, The Sun's Tirade, Untitled Unmastered, We Got It From Here, Thank You For Your Service, Views, Birds in the Trap, Still Brazy, Atrocity Exhibition, For Your Eyes Only, Major Key, Jeffrey, Slime Season 3, Blank Face LP, Savage Mode, Lil Big Puck, The Divine Feminine, and one of the most underrated albums of the decade, Honor Killed the Samurai by Car. So there are actually a lot of different talk. This is a very strange year, isn't it? Just going off the albums, it's where hip-hop really splits into two, doesn't it? And it takes on two distinct and completely separate identities, where on one hand you've got the weird experimental spiritual artists going into deeper, kind of into that lane with Untitled Unmastered and The Sun's Tirade and The Life of Pablo, but on the other side of the coin you've got guys like Lil Uzi and Kodak Black and 21 popping up onto the scene with, you know, coloured hair and just running amok and creating this cultural revolution where it's like, okay, that was this, let's do something different. It was almost a counterculture. And the culture and the counterculture were almost existing simultaneously. And there was a bit of controversy. I remember for the lead up to For Your Eyes Only, J. Cole, when he had a line dissing kind of all Lil rappers, talking about, you know, 8-week rappers and things like that. And it was just like, it felt like a very stark contrast at the time. How did you see it this year?
Well, I personally think this could be my favourite year from the decade. And I think it doesn't have necessarily my favourite album of the decade, but it's got the high quality and the depth, and that's what stands out to me from 2016. I think what I'd like to start with this year would probably be the Blank Face LP, the Schoolboy Q, and I think this has always been one of our favourite albums
for sure.
And I think maybe as of recent, it hasn't been, you know, an album that I have gone back to, but at the time and in the years preceding it, it had a lot of replay value, and it's got one of the 3 best track runs I've had the pleasure of listening to as well.
Go on, what is it?
Well, you've got now you put me on the spot. You've got I'm trying to remember.
We can come back to it if you want. Do you want to? I'll say my thoughts. You can look it up if you want. Blank Face LP to me was one of the few albums that I ever bought on CD, because at the time my first car had a CD player, not aux, not Bluetooth. So that album I absolutely smashed when I started driving. Whenever I listen to it now, I just think about driving, which is perfectly conducive to. My issue now is that I overplayed it so much that it's very difficult for me to go back. I think, like you said about Forest Hill Drive, a lot of the gloss on that album, which is really unfortunate, because that was one of our favourite albums. And it's not something I go back to often, admittedly. But what was that run you were speaking of?
Yeah, so it was By Any Means, which is, you know, Metro Boomin Beat, Dope Dealer, and John Muir. That was just fantastic to listen to at the time. You just had 3 absolute slappers just coming back to back to back, and I think that's why this album stands out to me, is that Schoolboy was just rapping his ass off.
He really was, and he was going in an interesting direction in terms of the way it was mixed and produced, and it was very zany, wasn't it? It had a lot of moments where I don't know if psychedelic is quite the right word, but it definitely went in directions that were just a little off-kilter, which I think kept it really interesting. Unfortunately for Schoolboy, and us for that matter, the album didn't sell as much as he wanted it to, and it didn't tour as well as he wanted it to. So I think Crash Talk was very much influenced by the reception or lack thereof of Blankface, which is kind of an unfortunate moment if you track the history of kind of the 2010s, where we got to a point where the great music wasn't doing as well as the other music, and it was the great artists that were really having to conform, unfortunately. But that's not to bash the other side, which I want to get to. I know you probably wouldn't have as much thoughts on it as I would, but regardless, this to me was the height of the SoundCloud era. So a lot of great music from this era didn't end up on albums. It was an incredible creative revolution, as I said, where bedroom rap took over and artists were able to make it outside of a studio, outside the help of the big machine, the big industry, and just make, XXXTentacion, Look at Me, that song did, 600 mil on YouTube, and that was recorded on the same microphone Jarrid's on right now, the Blue Snowball and Audacity. So it was just an incredible era where it felt like anything was really possible. Another way to really track this cultural shift was if you look at the XXL freshman class of 2016 versus the 2 years prior. So 2014, we get Chance the Rapper, Isaiah Rashad and Vic Mensa. 2015, we get Fetty Wap, GoldLink and Vince Staples and Rory. And 2016, we get Uzi, 21, Kodak and Yachty. So it just felt like a complete 180 where we were leaving behind the rubric that we'd marked rap by up until that point, and lyricism and a lot of those things that people really appreciated about rap went out the door, and we began to value different things, presence and ad-libbing and things like that. And it sounds trivial, I guess, to a lot of people, but that was really the way forward. It was reminiscent almost and of the 60s in rock and roll to me, where it wasn't so much about the technical advancement of the craft. It's not necessarily that rappers got more technical or more lyrical, but it had a creative kind of push forward. It was the rejection of past ideas, the notion of being a counterculture. A lot of people at the time felt like hip-hop was dying when Uzi and those guys came out, but to me, it was actually the revitalization of the genre. It took a lot back about what hip-hop was based on, and it gave you something different as a replacement.
I think for someone like you, I think it took hip-hop into a new direction, and it was enjoyable, and it sounded like it was just fun music.
It was fun.
My problem now is that I think we're getting bashed over the head with it a little bit too much, and that's my problem with it.
As with anything, if anything's too good, it just gets done to death, doesn't it? And nothing in music really dies gracefully. It either comes to a halt stop, or it withers out until no one wants to hear it anymore, and that's just the reality. But yeah, an interesting line I pulled from this year was from Isaiah Rashad's album. He said, "Lately, I've only been bumping that Yachty." And that to me was indicative of the cultural divide, because Isaiah Rashad is obviously part of this TD machine that represents a certain ideology of what hip-hop should be. And here he is basically pumping up someone on the complete other side of the bridge. And I didn't like it at the time, because I felt like, as I might have mentioned, the music took a while to grow on me. So I was like, why are you pumping this up? This is not hip-hop to me. But in hindsight, it was a very brave kind of movement where he was really bridging together the two styles.
Yeah, I think that's it shows the strength of the genre as a whole, is that we don't need to pigeonhole it into one place. You're going to have different age groups, and you're going to have different cultures enjoying different hip-hop. It's just as plain as that.
I feel like the genre really brought a lot of the funk back. Like it might sound corny to say, but when it gets too lyrical, it starts to feel like a bit of a maths equation. It feels rigid and stale, and it's just like you're thinking too much. And I think 2016, although it lacked in that lyricism, they were bringing back that funk, that eccentric energy, that excitement, and the hair colors and the production styles and the ad-libs. It all just kind of brought back this feeling that I wouldn't say it had been lost, because as we'll go on to say, that some of the years prior were great years, but it brought a new energy. It almost took rap into a punk rock phase, where they're like, that was that, this is this, let's get moving.
I think that's where Eminem gets lost in this whole last 10 years, is that he's trying to rap his ass off, but it's not what people want to hear. It just comes across as, we've seen this before. Yeah,
exactly right. Sorry, another that didn't make the XXL freshman list that was awesome at the time was Famous Dex. He should have made one, but so his songs, Japan, and what was the one with A$AP Rocky?
Pick It Up.
pick it up. Yeah, just awesome. Just wow, like the cadences and the kind of dexterity that he was rapping with. People don't. I don't think people value, at least on one side of the fence, they don't actually value the what it takes to make a song like that. How sharp you've got to be with your delivery, and so yeah, a really really cool music coming out at the time. And it was nice to get satisfied on both ends. I think was the really cool thing about 2016 and 2017 for that matter, is that we were really getting hit with it on both sides, which was awesome.
Before we move on,
yeah,
just want to mention A Tribe Called Quest. We got it from here. This album, like an old school act in A Tribe Called Quest come out with one of their best works and a tribute to Phife Dawg as well. This was very nostalgic and memorable to me today, and something I still return to. They were able to get artists like Kendrick on the album and really complement what they were trying to bring as well.
A lot of people, Kendrick, I think Andre, Kanye. Who else did they get? Anderson .Paak.
Yeah.
So that's an example of lyricism where you're not resting on the laurels of your lyricism. Like too many lyricists thinks it's just enough to be lyrical. They were lyrical and they were funky and they were zany and they were cool and they were making bold decisions and they were using instrumentation. And I think that, what a victory lap that album was. Is that their last album? Did they break up after that?
Yeah, I think so. Don't quote me on it. I think it was the last thing they released.
Well, it is to date. I don't know if they'll release anything in the future, but if they don't, what an album to go out on. I think you lose Phife Dawg and you do him that honor. That's just, it's as incredible of a tribute album as has ever been made across genres. So I was going to move on, but now that I'm looking at this list, I think we've got to do a few more albums justice. The Divine Feminine, one of our favorite albums. Wow, that was a really cool direction for Mac Miller to go in. I think it gets shadowed a bit by his last two, which people really gravitate to now. There's something about when an artist dies, the music that almost predicted that, or the music that was made in that headspace, I think resonates more deeply with people. But The Divine Feminine, to me, marks just a point where he was just so happy and positive, and the album was just light and just, it was just soft and just beautiful.
Yeah, I think beautiful is the right word for it. And Mac Miller really delved into what he wanted to do, and it had that jazz influence. And he had that the big song with Anderson .Paak that came out in the album, which Dang, which was fantastic. And then the song he did with Ariana Grande on the album as well. It's just awesome. It's just beautiful music.
Yeah.
And like you said, with this year as a whole, artists really went into the direction they wanted to go into, and they just did what they wanted to do. And I think that's a massive compliment to the artists and the music that we get to listen to today still.
Yeah, and I was reverting back to a question I proposed with the big day. Can great music come out of happiness? Well, I think I've just answered myself, because The Divine Feminine was definitely happy, and it was definitely an incredible album. So and I think that's, we could do a whole Mac Miller video, but that really shows the dichotomy of Mac Miller, that he could pull from both ends of the emotional spectrum and just make incredible music. And then you couple that with his just artistic evolution over the decade. It's quite unprecedented for someone to change face so many times over the space of a decade. We could get to a few more on this. There's The Life of Pablo. There's what I do want to get onto is Birds by Travis Scott.
Yeah.
Because that is my favorite Travis album. I know that's blasphemy for a lot of people, because rodeo is rodeo, whatever. But Birds to me is Travis. It's almost like as if you're reading this, it's too late. It's a nonchalant kind of nocturnal album. It's not trying too hard to reach too high. It just it's in this really cool flow state. And I think that album moves so fluidly through its track list, and it's just one. Out of all these albums, it's by far the easiest to get through from top to bottom and not get bored.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it, is that it's got so much connective tissue, song to song. There's some standouts on this album, whether it be the Andre 3000 song, The Ends, and then
Way Back.
Yeah, Way Back, and Pick Up the Phone at the end of the album. It's just, there's some massive...
Can I add two more to that?
Yeah.
Guidance and First Take. Underrated songs, really awesome.
And then obviously Goosebumps is on the album as well. And he got some big names on this album, and I still feel like this album gets forgotten.
It does get forgotten, because I don't think it has... Yeah, that's interesting, because I would say it doesn't have the heavy hitters, but Goosebumps is literally as heavy of a hitter as you get. So I don't know what it is with this album, but yeah, I think it does get lost in a bit of the noise a bit, which it really shouldn't, because to me at least, this is by far the one I go back to the most, and will continue doing so. Okay, for the sake of time, we'll move on. We could definitely make a whole video about 2016, but let's go to 2017. We get Damn, 444, Flower Boy, wow, what a top 3. Big Fish Theory, More Life, Culture, Playboy Carti, Without Warning, Forever is a Mighty Long Time, Is It Album, Future / Hendrix, The Never Story, Black Swan, You Only Live Twice, Ransom 2, and of course the one you really want to talk about, DJ Khaled's Grateful. No,
oh, jeez. Did you even mention the Saturation?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
No,
Jeez.
I was joking about Saturation.
You had me there.
Yeah, so we'll obviously get to Saturation as we gave a bit of precursor when we touched on Ginger earlier, but Saturation, I think, was, in terms of our friendship, just as about as good a soundtrack as you could refer to. So I'll just start by saying, for me, this was a similar year to 2014. It was a year of discovery, challenging myself with new sounds. I was 19 in 2017, so I was a massive fan of lyrical hip-hop, and I'd kind of resisted the change in 2016, but I remember there was one day in 2017 where I had a heart-to-heart with myself, and I said, mate, you are too young to be too old for this mumble stuff, learn to love it. And funnily enough, the bridge that was Ransom 2 by Mike Will made it. I was listening to that one time driving along on a Friday when the album first came out, and I don't know what happened. Things just started clicking for me. The Young Thug, who else? The Lil Yachty, or some of those guys, and it just finally clicked for me. And then from there, I really delved into Playboy Carti and Lil Uzi and Migos' Culture. Wow, what an album! But what are the standouts for you for this year?
Well, the standouts, we'll get to Brockhampton later because I think we can end with that one. But the standout for me, it has to start with Damn, in my opinion, because there was high anticipation for this album, and it's not with there when it comes to Good Kid, Mad City and To Pimp a Butterfly. And what we mention a lot with this album is that it's not bad by any means at all. It's that Kendrick's just got a quality that is higher than everyone else's. And there are some absolutely brilliant songs on this album, whether it be Fear, whether it be Triple X, that they really stand out. It's just, I think it's evident that we could hear Kendrick going into a different sound with this album, and maybe it was more mainstream than what he was doing before. Yeah, definitely. I think, depending on who you ask, this album is both underrated and overrated, because I feel like there was an initial wave of praise, and I think it got 97 on Metacritic, just unprecedented numbers. And then with the praise came this sense, a bit of backlash, where people were like, well, it's good, but it's not all that. And then it being good and not all that turned to it's just not all that. And then I think there was like a bit of resistance to the album. So I think on that card it was a bit underrated to where people don't give it its props. I think it's a solid 7 to an 8 out of 10. I think not every album can be as good as Good Kid and To Pimp a Butterfly, but I think it serves a crucial point in his discography where it's almost like I don't have the answers. Like Good Kid and To Pimp a Butterfly, it was very ideologically driven, and I think Damn was the first album where he just threw his hands up and quote him, but he said, "Pray for me." Yeah. And it was I remember we were listening to that together for the first time, and when it got to Feel, I just that was one of those just gut punch songs, similar to when I listened to You for the first time, but it was just like, man, our boy Kendrick is not in the best place right now. We find him in quite a place of emotional turmoil. Yeah, you can really it highlights Kendrick's vulnerability at the time, and he's just not afraid to say it how it is. I think a song like Fear, where he's going through different moments of his life, and talking about the fears that he has with the different stages of life that he is at, and it's fantastic to hear that perspective. Yeah, for sure. You mentioned that you had recently listened to Flower Boy again. What were the standout songs to you? If you want to pull those up? For me at least, Flower Boy was really when Tyler stopped mucking around and said, all right, this is me taking it seriously. And I think he's kind of denounced the album because it wasn't as bold and experimental as Igor. And he said, oh, you like Flower Boy? Well, of course you like Flower Boy. Flower Boy was made for you to like it. And I think he sells himself a bit short there because it does still have moments of experimentation, like Garden Shed, I think was just absolutely incredible. The whole track list is just littered with just awesome, like that album is really one that
from track 1 to the last track, you are stepping into a world and you stay completely immersed in that world. And you live there for the course of the album. But yeah, get to your standout tracks from that one.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, is that, this album is on a different world.
And what an album cover as well. Yeah. So I've got to mention, just incredible.
You look at the album cover and it doesn't look like it's on Earth. It looks like he's on some, I don't know, it's like he's on Mars, but it's got grass in there. I don't know, that's probably a silly way to put it. But yeah, Garden Shed is one song that I was very familiar with, and I think you got me onto that a couple of years back. The song that stood out to me today was See You Again featuring Kaliukas. That
beautiful.
Was fantastic. 9/11 Mr. Lonely with Frank Ocean and Steve Lacy was fantastic as well. And I listened to this today, and I'm not very familiar with this album at all. So they're the songs that stood out to me. I feel like I'm going to give this more listens over the next few weeks and get a real opinion on it. So maybe we can come back to this album.
Yeah, of course. I'd love to do a full review on it.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of thoughts. But yeah, I think between this and Saturation Trilogy and some of the others to an extent, it's hard to put a word on what was happening to the sound of hip hop, but it was good.
Yeah, well, I think
in short, it was very good.
Yeah, well, the Big Fish theory is probably one to speak about when it comes to sound. Vince Staples went with this, electronic
Well,
sound.
it's an anomaly because he hasn't gone back to it since, and no one really picked that up. So it's not like it had influence, but when you look at 2017, it was just such an awesome detour.
Yeah, it's a really good album, Big Fish Theory, and that song was highlighted by Bag Back when the single came out, and that's a fantastic single and a fantastic song. And then just as a whole, what I like about the Big Fish Theory is that it's very consistent sonically in what it's trying to deliver. It doesn't detour from what the main goal of the album was. It sticks with that and it delivers the whole way through.
Yeah, and one thing I love about Vince, I've always loved, he never overstays his welcome. He always makes great paced music with momentum, and he knows when to just leave a track list, leave you wanting more. Every Vince album ends and you just want to go back to the first song and just do it all over again. And I think Big Fish Theory is the absolute epitome of that. What else have we got? 444. That is a very, very interesting album because it is the absolute outlier of Jay-Z's discography. I don't think anyone in 2001 would have ever imagined that he'd make an album quite like that, where it's like lo-fi. I've got a theory about the album that it's actually mixed in a certain way that is not conducive to be played loud. If you've tried to play the album loud, it falls apart. The vocals are just loud, and there's just it pops in strange ways. It's not together. Like, you compare it to a Travis Scott or a Kendrick album where everything's together and just awesome. Like, 444 is almost deliberately poorly mixed, which is no reason why it would be. Like, if he wanted to, he could get the best mixed album ever. Like, he's got all the resources. So it's almost like he's purposely giving you an album that you're not supposed to take and play outside and play loud and celebrate. It's like, no, you listen to this with headphones on by yourself in your bedroom and you reflect on what you're hearing. Do you kind of get that vibe from the album?
Yeah, you've just made me think of the times that I've listened to 444 and I can't remember ever blasting a song out from this album. It's either always been with the headphones or in the car, but not in a, I'm blasting this out the speakers nature.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the general delivery of the album as a whole. There's no songs of that album where Jay-Z is just trying to, like you said, it's isolated from the rest of his work. He's, he's delivering a message that he wants to deliver.
And the title track I want to touch on, because that, to me, there are a few songs. I think what was that song off Scorpion that I told you to get onto? It was like around the middle of Scorpion. I'm trying to think.
Can't Take a Joke.
No, it wasn't that. It's like 2 Below that or something.
8 out of 10.
No, 2 Below.
Sandra's Rose.
No. It's the last song on the first song.
Oh, Is There More?
Is There More? That's
the
right.
one, yeah.
Yeah, Is There More and 444 kind of almost two of a kind, where it's like an artist or individual really who is just on top of the mountain, and they're on top of the mountain, they're in the big mansion, they've got it all, they've got everything they wanted, and they have a time, like, it's almost like they shut the door on their mansion and they just realize how, like, quiet it is, and it's just the sound of quietness. And I think Drake is further in it, where that song is completely desolate. 444 still has that emotion attached to it, where it's like, if you keep going the way you're going, you're going to lose everything and you're going to be by yourself.
Like a family feud.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Nobody talks on the family feuds, and that's a really great way to put it. When the mansion doors are shut, what's happening?
Yeah, exactly. And how do you feel deep inside? And 444, the sample, I listened to that with my girlfriend Sandra, and she really took to that song as well, because I think there's an emotional language just on the sample alone that's just like, wow, like that's that is really an incredible song.
If you're ready to move on to, I just wanted to speak about More Life from Drake.
Go.
I feel like this album had the potential to be Drake's best album. And
as in, if you cut it down to the right amount of songs, it would be?
Yeah, or even if you cut it down to a particular part of this album. I think the Caribbean run that Drake goes on this album is probably my favourite thing that he's ever done.
Ever done?
Yeah, I love it so much. And
big call.
Yeah, it is a big call. I really enjoy him over that sound, And
I do too, by the way.
If he made an EP out of that 6-7 track run that starts from Passion Fruit all the way to Blem, then I feel like that would have been really successful, because it would have been Drake saying, I'm doing this and this is what I wanted to do, and we'll separate it from everything else. But as per usual, Drake's albums are too bloated. That's why his quality drops down, because it's just too much to filter.
Could you put Fake Love in that mix as well, with the kind of tropical sample? Would you know?
No, I wouldn't put Fake Love in there, because I feel like Fake Love is trying too hard to be commercial and appealing. I feel like what Drake did with Passion Fruit to Blem in that run was that it was just nothing felt forced. It was smooth, and it just ran its course.
Man, Passion Fruit is bloody incredible. Yeah. Like, that's the most effortlessly commercial song ever, where it's just like, it just oozes like appeal. Like, it's not even trying to be likable. It just is. Passion Fruit, yeah, that came at a time where I was kind of still a bit resistant to pop rap, and that just put a nail in that coffin and said, you know what, there is great pop rap out there, and there's no reason. I mean, it's not even rap, is it? Passion Fruit. That's more of a
it's really interesting, because Passion Fruit, and to get it together, like there's a house take to it as well. Like Get It Together, it's a Black Coffee beat, and Black Coffee is a house artist. So Drake's listening to heaps of different music. I just want to see. I'd love him to do more of that. Maybe not in the Caribbean route, but find something he likes, try his take on it. I think that's why he's been so strong, is that Drake adopts different styles of music and just tries to make it his own in a way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we get to our number one, let's do the big one, the Saturation Trilogy. I mean, this is probably a 2-hour video in of itself, but let's try and keep it as brief as possible. What are your quick thoughts about the Saturation Trilogy?
Oh, well, it's my favourite piece of work from the whole last 10 years, and just something I love going back to very frequently, and it doesn't get old for me. I always find something new when it comes to these 3 albums. When it comes to Saturation 1, it's how raw and honest the album is. They say what they want to say, and I think why this album works for someone of our age group is that it's just so relatable. Saturation 2, you've just got a group of boys having a lot of fun. They're just rapping, and there's no care given to what the situation they're in. They just want to rap at the time. And then Saturation 3, and I know you've probably got different feelings to this album. Was I feel like there was a little bit more maturity to the album. Obviously, it starts off with Boogie, which is probably one of the most fun songs. But they go on a run where it goes from Johnny and Stupid, and these songs where they're it just slows down a bit, and I think it's probably out of all the albums they released from that era, I enjoy the production the most in that album.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. That's fair. Let's give him a bit of an anecdote, because the day that this is funny actually. The day that Saturation 3 came out, we were with a group of probably about 10 of our friends, and we were in an Airbnb down the coast. And I remember the new Star Wars had just come out, The Last Jedi, and I absolutely hated it, and I didn't want anything to do with anything Jarrid liked. And so I was just like, nah, stuff everything. I was so cut by the movie. And Jarrid, the day that the album was released, Jarrid was late to the Airbnb, and he kind of almost brought the album with him, and he's just like, hey man, like just trust me, it's good. And I'm like, all right. And we're just listening to it as a group, probably like, I think maybe 12 of us, on the balcony just overlooking the beach. And that's kind of, whenever I go through the track list now, that's kind of, it's probably the most amazing thing about music is it's able to just evoke a memory in its most purest sense, not even like the visuals or anything, just purely how did you feel in that moment. And I think for me, again, biased, but the Saturation trilogy just evokes that feeling, and it will do for the rest of my life, just that feeling of becoming an adult and having fun with your friends, and that those uni years where, you know, you've got a purpose, but at the same time life's not all that serious, and you can, you know, you've got room to muck up, and you've got room to kind of find who you are and all that. And yeah, it's so cool how, without being a concept album or an album with a message, those three albums can evoke those themes so directly. Like, you get all of that from the albums without them having to say the words.
Yeah, I think when it comes to creating memories, definitely, it takes me back to that year as a whole. Like, I felt like 2017 was a big growth year for myself, and like this album was a big part of it. All three albums as a whole were all a part of it. It's something that I don't think I'll probably ever experience again with music.
Yeah, it's quite amazing how much good. I mean, how many songs do you reckon are between the three albums? It must be close to 60, right?
No, a lot less than that. I'd say it's probably around 40?
40?
40 to 45.
Okay, fair enough. But even so, that's
including the skits as well.
Yeah, okay, fair. But even the songs that were left on the cutting room floor and all that, and then the Lucy's that came out between the albums, it was an incredible amount of work to produce within 1 year for a new group. And I don't know, it was just so, it was amazing how immediate they were.
It's unprecedented.
It was. And I don't think, so I guess as a bit of insurance for our reputation, like I'm completely aware of the stigma behind Brockhampton and you know, the idea that they appeal to a certain demographic and they're not, whatever. But that aside, like, it's one of those things where you've got to put aside the stigma and just listen to what the music's doing. And I don't, if you put aside the stigma, I can't see why you can't appreciate those three albums. So yeah, let's leave 2017 on that. And of course, if you've been paying attention, you've already realized what our number one is, and that would be 2015. I don't even know where to start. I mean, I guess I'll run through the albums, but we have To Pimp a Butterfly, If You're Reading This It's Too Late, At Long Last ASAP, DS2, The Powers That Be, Summertime 06, Before the Money, I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside, Rodeo, Barter 6, Tetsuo and Youth, Compton, Documentary 2 and 2.5, and of course, a little cult favourite of ours, 90059. So,
and there's one more cult favourite.
Oh, is there?
Yellow Wolf Love Story.
Don't do Yellow Wolf like that. No, if you're listening, Yellow Wolf, it's nothing to do with you. It's just some funny memories to that album. So yeah, I mean, I'm not even gonna ask you what's your standout, because I mean, To Pimp a Butterfly is To Pimp a Butterfly. I mean, that's just, it is water wet. But wow, it's now that I'm reading this, it actually 2017 runs for 3 straight lines, the albums. 2015 not so much, so it's not as deep maybe as some of these other ones in 2016 as well that came before it. But just off the strength of its top 5. Oh my god! Like, wow, what a year!
Yeah, it is very strong at the top end, and obviously, To Pimp a Butterfly is To Pimp a Butterfly, like you said. But I think this is Drake's strongest work as a whole.
Yeah.
I know it took you a while to get onto this album, but this is what really made me like Drake as an artist. I felt like Drake to me was a bit of a, not a meme, but just I couldn't take him too seriously until this album came out. But what I love about this album was the vibe he created and the sound. It was very nightlife-like, and he's just spitting hard. It was fun, and he really embraces what he was about. Drake's got this, monotone voice, but it's just something sucks you in with it. I don't know how it works, but it was just, you're listening on word to word. So 2015 was a strong year for Drake.
I think for Drake, his talking voice and his rapping voice are so similar that when he's rapping, you just feel like it's doing this thing where Jay-Z was able to do with his first album. It feels conversational. It feels like he's not performing for you, he's talking to you. And so I think that's what correct me if I'm wrong, but that might be what you're getting at, but is how he's so monotone, yet he pulls you in, is just because that is his talking voice. What is it? You and the Six, when he's doing that song and he's ending every line with, mama, and I know some people clowned him for that, Dead End Hip Hop, shout out Dead End Hip. But to me, that's just, it was just incredible. It was just like, it felt so personal and just so like a real conversation that was being had. And it was just, and there are moments like that all through the album. I know you and I are massive fans of Jungle.
Star 67's the one that really like encapsulates what you're saying to me. The second half of that song is just Drake.
Is that the Working on the Phones?
Yeah. That's fantastic. That song's really grown on me as the years have gone on. And then Drake obviously had What a Time to Be Alive with Future, and a lot of people consider this a fantastic trap album. To me, this album's never been something that I go back to, but there's highlights in the album for sure.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. I actually I don't think I included What a Time to Be Alive, but that's definitely in the mix for sure. So yeah, another kind of really cool year for the changing face of hip hop. I think it was really the pinnacle of what was being worked towards from 2011, when we had a lot of these guys debuting: A$AP Rocky, Danny Brown, Kendrick Lamar, a lot of those guys. And this was really when those careers came to fruition, and they were all dropping magnum opuses. Not least of which Vince Staples with Summertime '06. This is an album. Wow, it really had to grow on me. People in the forums were talking about it on release, and I just didn't get it. I was listening to it, and I'm like, this is so bland. And I wasn't listening to it right. I wasn't paying attention to the textures and the nuance and the little production decisions that were being made. It's actually, if you really listen to a song like Bird and the Bees, it's not skeletal. It might sound skeletal at first. You put on a good pair of headphones, and there is so much depth and spectrum to that. There's so much depth to the production on that album, and that goes for all the way through to Summertime, which, oh Lord, Summertime hit me right when I needed it. Like at that point in my life, he was saying exactly what I was thinking. And so I guess another example of personal bias, but Summertime '06 has definitely stayed with me since that year.
Yeah, I need to listen to Summertime '06 again. It's been a long time since I've given that a go, and I don't want to say it was forgettable, but it was just probably not hitting me at the time. So there's a couple of loose songs on the album that I've got on my like songs on Spotify that I do listen to when it comes up and shuffle, but as a whole, it sounds like a project that I need to return to.
Yeah, another album I want to touch on, I don't know if you're as familiar with, Before the Money, or Badass. One of the coolest, most well-stylized album titles ever, the way he was able to pull that together. But that was a really cool album. I think he really graduated from the 1999 sound. I don't like it as much as 1999, but I think it was almost a Illmatic, It Was Written situation where he just took his artistry further, and he kind of went to more varied, interesting beats on that one. We also had, At Long Last A$AP. I think that's a good one to get onto, because this I got onto a little later. But where do you start with this one? Joe Fox's contribution all the way through. I think he's on 6 songs, and he's just bringing an element to A$AP Rocky's music that's just classy and cool and alternative and different, and you don't really hear that as much on rap albums.
It's a brilliant story, that with Joey Fox. I'm pretty certain that was the guy that A$AP Rocky found on the streets busking
in London. I think at like 4 a.m. or something like that.
And obviously, it's he was on the album for an extended run, but the mood that A$AP Rocky evoked on this album with some of the songs is just it's second to none. Whether it be Canal Street, whether it be LSD, whether it be Jukebox Joints, and like this is why the album's so strong, is that he's able to create moments.
I think a barometer for how good an album is how hard do the features go, especially when those features are established artists. Obviously, a new artist is going to give you their all, but what he gets out of Mos Def, what he gets out of Lil Wayne, what he gets out of Kanye West is just, they're not giving those features to anyone. I mean, you just touched on Jukebox Joints, like, wow, what a feature. Like, quotable after quotable, the energy, the soaring kind of orchestra in the background. I mean, imagine mixing that in the studio and waiting for the world to hear that and just being like, when this hits, like, like that hit the earth like a comet, that song. Just incredible. Some of my favorites are Holy Ghost. I love Holy Ghost. I love Wavy Bone with, was it Juicy J and some of those guys, yeah. I think. And then obviously M's with Lil Wayne. Just it does so much, that album. I think when we're talking about testing, I use this as a reference point to what that album didn't do for me, and this one did. It's varied all the way through. He's doing so. I mean, the Pretty Flacco song. I mean, that sound is completely different to Back Home, but they managed to fit on the same album. They're sequenced from point A to point B to a point where he's taking you along every step of the way, and it never feels disjointed. It never feels like... It's quite incredible to have that many different sounds on the album, yet every song gets you in the mood for the next song. It never feels like stark. So if that's it for that one, what about Rodeo? Did you have anything down about Rodeo?
So there's another Travis Scott album that I've been listening to more frequently recently, and the song that sticks out to me, which is going to sound stupid, I actually had never heard it until a couple months ago. I still can't believe this. Is 90210, and I think it's almost my favorite Travis Scott song, and that's probably obvious to a lot of people, but like it's just brilliant. Like it's what he does at the start of the song. It's so slow and dreary, and the production just stands out though. He's got do you know what instrument it is, where it's just making the tones at the start?
Would it just be a synthesizer, or is it a sample?
It is a synthesizer.
Yeah.
And then it breaks into the sample in the second half of the song, and then Travis is just rapping along that song. It feels like an absolute journey from start to finish.
Yeah, Travis did that really well, and I can't hate on the album whatsoever. Even though Birds was my favorite, Rodeo does have these high points where it's it's how do you put Travis in a word? It's really just psychedelic trap. It's going to a very high place, and of course Mike Dean is he can't be left off that discussion, because Mike Dean really pulled everything together and created that sound and took the mixing elements to its threshold, to where it was just clipping, and it's got that little kind of layer of distortion, but it's so loud and it's so full. I think the real standout on that album for me is Wasted, when the chorus hits and it's really going down. Like that whole thing is just it hits so hard, and you can turn it up to 40, and it still stays together, and it still sounds put together. It doesn't fall apart. So yeah, Rodeo for me, definitely another high point in the year. What about Compton by Dr. Dre? I think a little bit forgotten, do you think?
Yeah, it is a little bit forgotten, and it's not comparable to Dr. Dre's other two albums, because I think it's a very different album, and obviously he barely produced any of it either. So, but there are some memorable songs. I think our favourite song was a song featuring Kendrick, and then it had the Easy
Dark Side.
Yeah, Dark Side. That's fantastic. And then
Game Time. What about Just Another Day by The Game?
Yeah, Just Another Time by The Game. That song goes hard. Was that song in Straight Outta Compton?
It was just the instrumental. It was around the time they were riding. I remember the camera pans along the Compton street, and they're riding motorbikes in slow motion, and it sounds kind of corny saying it out loud, but like when you watch it, it's put together really
very fitting.
Well. Yeah, it's fitting.
So Compton's an album that I always go back to when it comes up on the shuffle. I don't listen to the album as a whole, but there are some fantastic tracks on it. Yeah,
definitely. I remember when the album first came out, I went in with the... I was really shooting myself in the foot. What I was looking for is the Still Dre's. I was looking for the next episode, the Nothing But a G thing. I wanted that big hit. I wanted to see what a big hit from Dre sounded like in 2015. And I was just getting it wrong, because it doesn't have that. It's not an album with a real strong kind of standout song, but it is a very solid album nonetheless. I think a big gripe that a lot of people have was it was overproduced. It was just a bit much. But I think, I don't know, on subsequent listens, it really comes together. It never feels like it never feels like sensory overload. I think it's actually pretty well thought out.
I think you could say it's grand. I think it's pretty grand, and it's quite cinematic as well, some of the sounds on the album.
Rightfully so.
I think that's probably what sticks out to me when it comes to Compton is, there's this Hollywood aspect of California that comes out to me. So it's still got that West Coast vibe, but it's very Hollywood.
And a classic album cover. Yeah. It can't be forgotten. Let's move along. I know we're probably going to end up skipping over To Pimp a Butterfly, but I mean, we may as well save that for a review or something of long-form conversation, but that really holds up the entire year. Let's finish fittingly with 90059. So a lot of people might be surprised to hear that Jarrid and I are so fond of this album, because I think it does get a bit forgotten in all of the noise. But, I just remember when this album came out, just kind of riding around, and this is when we first started driving, we got our full license, and just riding around listening to this, it was just, it just represented a time period for us, didn't it?
Yep, I remember driving around my mum's old 1999 Holden Commodore, beat up car. We burnt this song to a CD. We were listening to it on pretty much the worst speakers you could listen to, but this album just worked in that car for us. And when it comes to the actual album as a whole, is that it's J-Rock's best work, but also includes some of TDE's best efforts as well. So, you got a song like Easy Bake, and the energy that J-Rock brings on the song matches with Kendrick, and just the back and forth, and then you get scissor on the end of the song when the song changes its tone.
And then can I mention when they did the traffic jam thing and they threw Kendrick?
So
God, when that came out, that was like just fantasy fulfillment. That was my favorite beat with my favorite rapper on top of what had already been an awesome feature. That was just so awesome.
And then you get Isaiah Rashad on the hook of Wanna Ride, and that song is just hard.
What a vibe.
Yeah,
what a vibe.
Hard, gritty. And then you obviously have the why am I forgetting? What's the alias they come under? All four of them.
Black Hippie.
You get the Black Hippie song towards the end as well.
Yeah.
It's such a, as an album, like I feel like this is another album that works together. That all the songs, they melt into each other in a way.
Yeah, they do. It's very cohesive. Yeah, for me, the first song is, the first time I heard that, it's just like J-Rock's, because keep in mind, it doesn't feel like it now looking back, but J-Rock had been absent for 4 years, and this was a guy who didn't have a large body of work. So to come out straight out the gate with, can you pull up the track list, just so I'm not getting anything wrong?
Yeah, Necessary is the first track.
Necessary, that's right.
559 beat.
The way that beat comes in, I mean, that is the definition of a slapper. Like, the snare on that song is literally slapping, and it's and from there it just it goes through so many things. I remember when he was doing all the singles for the album. I think Gumbo was one of those. Did I get that right?
Yeah, Gumbo. So the track list that goes: Necessary, Easy Bake, Gumbo, Wanna Ride, The Ways.
The Ways is another great one.
Yeah. Telegram Going Crazy.
The weird thing about Telegram Goes Crazy is they added a verse like 3 years later.
Oh, really?
There's like a verse that J-Rock's last verse on the Spotify version they added, and it was like the first time I heard that, it was like, whoa, where did this come from?
I've never noticed that.
It's a weird quirk of streaming. Sometimes a song will just appear or disappear or change. It's very bizarre.
That reminds me of like how the first version of Damn I ever listened to is a completely different version.
And the other one, it's all TD, isn't it? The other one is, you know what I'm going to say? Sun's Tirade. Find the topic.
That one's a bit more understandable. That's understandable.
I get it. Yeah. Obviously, you couldn't do it, the sample, whatever. But
I can't listen to.
Yeah.
What was the song title? It was
Find a Topic.
Find a Topic. Oh yeah, Find a Topic. And I can't listen to the Spotify version.
Neither.
I've literally loaded the old version up on Spotify, so I can go back to it.
Take it off the album, honestly, because it's it needed that sample. But not to harp on about that. The other one was what was it? Money Trees Deuce. That was really cool. I mean, J-Rock was really on his pen game in this one as well. It wasn't too overtly lyrical. Like, he wasn't trying too hard to give you his spiritual miracle lyricals, but it was just lyrics that hit. Like, he just had lines. What was that one? Woke up in the motherfucker looking like a stick of dope. That kind of thing. Like, it's just
Vice City. I love his delivery on Vice City. Just the way that he flows on that beat. It's just so much fun. Vice City's a fun song. That was my favorite part about it. It's just like, we hadn't had many. Was there many songs that Black Hippie actually had that were original? Obviously, they had a few remixes on Good Kid, Mad City.
Not a lot of originals at all.
This is the last thing that they've done together as a whole. Like, I don't think we'll ever...
that part remix.
We'll never see anything they do together. It's just, I think it's gone way past that.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't even know if I want to anymore. Yeah. It's the moment's past. They're in different places. If it was going to happen, it should have been in that 2013 gap when none of them released an album, because I feel like that was when they were all kind of still on the same page. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm happy to wrap it up there if you are. I think 90059 is a good note to end it on. So, I mean, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think in terms of, where I sit with my list and compared to what you've listed out, it's very minor in the differences.
So you had 2016 as number one, did you?
Yeah, not officially. The way I ranked my albums was I just gave an average to the year in terms of score, and that was very similar to 2017. 16, 17, and 18 are the three standout years. 15, 16, 17 are the three standout years, for sure. But yeah, look, it's a very interesting measure to look at these albums in isolation year by year, because there's definitely great albums each year. It's just depending on whether there's the same depth.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think the one consistency between our lists is that there's a very distinct golden era between 14 and 17, I guess you could say. Those 4 years is about as good a year, that hip hop ever has. I think the only comparison might be 92 to 96. Would you maybe agree?
Yeah.
But yeah, and a lot of people probably won't like that because they're still caught up in the 90s, and I get that. But I think we're far enough away from the 2010s where I'm really happy to start giving those years their props and really start appreciating what they did for the movement of the genre and how they kind of propelled it to its highest point. It was kind of like in rock and roll in the 70s when they started bringing out kind of rock operas, and rock kind of became more cinematic and epic and weirder and at times more cynical almost. It went the other way with hip hop, where it became less cynical and more kind of about self-love and love for others and stuff like that. But yeah, it was an amazing time to be a hip hop fan, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think the fact that you can have just so many different types of people rapping is what I take out of this last 10 years. That, I feel like it's been a massive stereotype, before 2010, and I feel like we're finally out of that stereotype. Rap's now seen as mainstream.
I think the biggest achievement of the 2010s in hip hop, if you were to really boil it down to one thing, like I mentioned, 2010, Eminem was running to Rihanna for a hit song, Jay-Z was running to Alicia Keys. Nowadays, it's the other way around, and the 2010s, you can really track how that came to be and how it became such a force that it is today. So yeah, I really wonder, when we have kids and the next generation comes along, like, how will the 2010s be looked upon? It's obviously far too recent to really say for certain, but I can't help but feel like it'll be looked back on, especially, Kendrick's work is really the spine of this decade. It'll just be looked at as, I don't know what the comparison would be in terms of the precedent in other genres, in other eras of music, but it's got to be remembered as extremely significant, you'd think.
Yeah, I don't have a doubt about that. I think when you say that Kendrick's probably the first artist when it comes to quality that people will go back to, I think that's a given. But I find it interesting to see somehow some of these deep cuts and how they're going to be received. I think music's become an avenue that's become much more easier to release, so we're seeing a higher volume of music being released on a monthly basis even. So I think as time goes on, there's going to be pieces of work that we're going to completely forget about just because of the volume of music.
Yeah, for sure. And that was another nice thing about doing this list, is just kind of touching on albums that we don't really think about or talk about anymore. Unfortunately, we weren't allowed, we didn't have the time to get to them all. One thing I would have liked to get to is Still Brazy, because I know we really like that one.
Yeah.
But look, there's room for all of those in future videos, whatever that may be. Maybe we could do deep dives on individual years, or there's a million different formats to go about it. But look, that's about all the time we've got for today. Thank you so much for joining me, Jarrid. I hope that that you come back for future episodes and we kind of dive into some. We got a lot of ideas, so hopefully we dive into some of those.
Yep, I'm super keen. Whether it be movies, whether it be music, we've got plenty to talk about.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing is obviously the channel is Austin Thinks, so it's really giving myself the leeway to operate in as wide a ballpark as I want to. So there's definitely going to be movie conversations, music. It's going to be TV, whatever I really have an opinion on. That's what it's all about. So thank you everybody for joining, and catch you next time. Thank you.
Oh, and he gonna tear their ass up. Simple as that.